I was standing in my driveway on a Tuesday morning in Gilbert, Arizona, enjoying my coffee when I saw the White County van pull up outside my house. The vehicle had official-looking insignia on the side, and two people in khaki uniforms got out carrying clipboards and wearing badges that glinted in the August sun. My gut told me something was off the moment I saw them, but I couldn't place exactly what it was yet. "Excuse me, sir," the woman called out as she approached my property line. She was middle-aged, probably in her early 50s, with that particular haircut that screamed authority complex. Her partner, a younger man who looked uncomfortable in his uniform, stayed a few steps behind. "I'm Patricia Mendel with Maricopa County Code Enforcement. We've received multiple complaints about violations on your property." I set my coffee mug down on the porch railing and walked toward them, studying the badges more carefully as I got closer. Something about them looked wrong, almost too shiny, too new. "What kind of violations are we talking about?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Patricia flipped through the papers on her clipboard with practiced efficiency. "Your fence height exceeds county regulations by 6 inches. Your mailbox is a non-approved design, and you have unauthorized landscaping in your front yard that violates water conservation ordinances." I'd lived in Gilbert for 3 years, and I knew my property was compliant with all county codes. I'd made sure of it when I'd moved in. "Can I see your identification more closely?" I asked, reaching out my hand. She pulled back slightly, clutching her badge. "Sir, that's not necessary. We're here on official county business, and we need you to sign this acknowledgement of violations. You'll have 30 days to correct these issues or face fines of up to $500 per day." That's when recognition hit me like a freight train. I knew this woman. Her name wasn't Patricia Mendel. It was Patricia Morrison, and she was the president of the Heritage Hills Homeowners Association that covered my neighborhood. I'd seen her at exactly one HOA meeting when I'd first moved in, and I'd watched her berate 3 different homeowners over trivial issues for over an hour. I'd made a point of avoiding her ever since. "Patricia Morrison," I said flatly, "you're not with the county, you're with the HOA." Her face flushed red, but she didn't back down. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I'm here representing Maricopa County, and you need to comply with these citations." The young man behind her shifted uncomfortably, and I caught his eye. "You know this is illegal, right?" I said directly to him. "Impersonating a government official is a felony in Arizona." "We're not impersonating anyone," Patricia snapped, her voice rising. "These are legitimate code violations, and you will address them immediately." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "So you're confirming that you're representing yourself as a county official?" Patricia Morrison, HOA president, is currently claiming to be Patricia Mendel from Maricopa County Code Enforcement. She lunged forward, trying to grab my phone. "You can't record me without my permission." "Actually, Arizona is a one-party consent state," I said, stepping back and keeping the camera steady. "And I have every right to record what's happening on my own property. Now, I'm going to ask you one more time. Are you representing yourself as a county official?" The young man finally spoke up, his voice cracking slightly. "Patricia, maybe we should go. This isn't what you said it would be." "Shut up, Derek," she hissed at him. Then she turned back to me, her expression shifting to something that might have been meant to look authoritative but just came across as desperate. "Fine. Yes, I'm with the HOA, but these violations are real, and you're going to fix them whether the county makes you or we do." "Get off my property," I said calmly. "Both of you, right now." Patricia's face went from red to purple. "You can't talk to me like that. I have authority over this neighborhood, and you will show me respect." "The only authority you have is what's outlined in the HOA bylaws, which I've read thoroughly," I replied. Nowhere in those bylaws does it give you the right to impersonate county officials, wear fake badges, or drive around in a van made to look like a county vehicle. Now leave, or I'm calling the police right now. She stood there for another moment, clearly trying to decide if she could still salvage the situation. Finally, she spun on her heel and marched back to the van, with Derek scurrying behind her. They drove off, but not before Patricia rolled down her window and shouted, "This isn't over." I immediately went inside and transferred the video from my phone to my computer, making 3 backup copies. Then, I started doing research. I needed to know exactly what laws Patricia had broken, and what my options were for reporting her. The Arizona revised statutes were clear. Under ARS Section 13-2907, criminal impersonation of a government official was a Class 6 felony if done with the intent to cause harm or benefit oneself. The fake badges, the fake uniforms, the van designed to look official. This wasn't just Patricia being overzealous about HOA rules. This was systematic, premeditated fraud. I called the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office non-emergency line and explained the situation. The dispatcher took my information and said a deputy would be out to take a report within a few hours. Then, I called the Arizona Attorney General's office and asked to speak to someone in their Consumer Protection Division. After being transferred twice, I reached a woman named Sarah Chen who listened to my story with growing interest. "Mr. Larson, what you're describing is quite serious," she said. "Can you send us the video footage?" "Absolutely," I replied. My name was Connor Larson, and I'd spent 10 years as a paralegal before transitioning into IT consulting. I knew how to document evidence properly. "I'll email it right now. I also want to know if other homeowners in my neighborhood have been targeted by this same scheme." "That's an excellent question," Sarah said. "If you're willing, we'd like you to file a formal complaint. We'll open an investigation and we can subpoena HOA records to see if this is a pattern of behavior." "I'm definitely willing," I said. "Whatever it takes to stop this." After I hung up, I decided to do some investigating of my own. I walked down the street to my neighbor's house and knocked on the door. Tim Reynolds answered, looking harried. He and his wife had 2 young kids, and I could hear cartoons playing loudly in the background. "Hey, Connor," he said. "What's up?" Quick question. "Has anyone from the county come by recently to talk about property violations?" His expression darkened immediately. "Yeah, about 2 weeks ago. Some woman with a clipboard and a badge said our trampoline was too close to the property line and violated county safety codes. She said we'd get fined $500 a day if we didn't move it. We ended up paying someone $200 to relocate it to the back corner of the yard." "Did she give you her name?" "Patricia something. She had a county badge and everything." Tim's eyes widened. "Wait, why are you asking?" I told him what had happened at my house that morning and showed him the video on my phone. His face went from confused to angry in about 3 seconds. "Are you kidding me? That woman scammed us, and she wasn't even with the county, not even close. She's the HOA president, and she's been going around impersonating county officials. I've already reported her to the sheriff's office and the attorney general. If you want, I can give you the information so you can file a report too." "Damn right I want to file a report," Tim said. "My wife and I were so stressed about those fines. We actually looked into whether we could afford to just pay them instead of moving the trampoline." I gave Tim the contact information and moved on to the next house. Over the course of the next 3 hours, I talked to 14 different neighbors. 9 of them had been visited by Patricia and her accomplice Derek within the past month. The violations they'd been cited for ranged from ridiculous to completely fabricated. Wrong shade of paint on a front door, bushes trimmed in a non-approved manner, decorative rocks that supposedly violated landscaping codes, and even a bird feeder that was allegedly attracting protected wildlife inappropriately. Every single one of my neighbors had believed Patricia was a real county official. Most of them had already spent money fixing the supposed violations, or were planning to. One elderly couple, the Hendersons, had paid nearly $1,000 to repaint their entire house, because Patricia had told them their current color wasn't up to code. By the time the deputy sheriff arrived at my house around 2 in the afternoon, I had a list of names, dates, and specific incidents. Deputy Mike Fernandez was in his early 30s, professional, and he took detailed notes while I walked him through everything. "This is more extensive than I initially thought," he said, reviewing the pages of information I'd compiled. "You've essentially done half our investigation for us." "I worked as a paralegal for a decade," I explained. "I know how important documentation is. Well, it shows." He reviewed the video 3 times, zooming in on the fake badges. "These are definitely fraudulent. That badge design isn't even current. The county changed their insignia 2 years ago. She's probably buying these online somewhere." "What happens next?" I asked. "I'll file this report, and it'll go to the fraud division. Given the number of victims and the amount of money involved, I'd expect detectives to be assigned pretty quickly. They'll probably want to interview you and your neighbors. The Attorney General's office will likely run a parallel investigation on the consumer protection side." "And Patricia Morrison, what about her?" Deputy Fernandez closed his notebook. "Once the detective reviews everything, they'll probably obtain a warrant. If the evidence is as clear-cut as it appears, she'll be arrested and charged. Her accomplice, too. This isn't a small crime, Mr. Larson. They're looking at felony charges, possible prison time, and definitely civil liability for the money they've essentially stolen from your neighbors." After he left, I sat down at my computer and started typing up a detailed timeline of everything that had happened. I included screenshots from the HOA website, copies of the neighborhood bylaws, and a breakdown of every interaction my neighbors had described. I sent it all to both the sheriff's office and the attorney general. Then, I did something that I knew would cause waves. I posted about it on the Heritage Hills neighborhood Facebook group. "Heads up to everyone in Heritage Hills," I wrote. "If you've been visited recently by someone claiming to be from Maricopa County Code Enforcement, you need to know that was not a county official. Patricia Morrison, our HOA president, has been impersonating county officials and issuing fake violations. I've reported this to law enforcement and the Attorney General. If this happened to you, please contact the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office immediately to file a report. I have video evidence and multiple witnesses." I attached a screenshot from the video showing Patricia in her fake uniform with the fraudulent badge clearly visible. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 20 minutes, I had 40 comments and 15 private messages. People were angry, confused, and several admitted they'd also been victims, but had been too embarrassed to mention it. One woman named Jessica wrote that Patricia had threatened her with county fines over a Christmas wreath that stayed up until January 2nd. Claiming it violated seasonal decoration ordinances. Jessica had paid a $75 fine directly to Patricia to avoid what she'd been told would be escalating county penalties. That detail made my blood run cold. Patricia hadn't just been scaring people into compliance. She'd been collecting money directly, claiming it was for county fines. That elevated this from harassment to outright theft and extortion. My phone rang around 6 that evening. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. "Mr. Larson, this is Detective Amanda Price with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, Fraud Division. I've been assigned to your case, and I have to say, the documentation you provided is exceptional. I've rarely seen a civilian complaint this well organized. Thank you, Detective. I wanted to make sure you had everything you needed. You certainly did. I've also been monitoring that Facebook thread you started. We've had 7 more victims contact us this evening alone. I'm coordinating with the Attorney General's office, and we're moving quickly on this. How soon can you come in to give a formal statement?" "I can come tomorrow morning if that works." "Perfect. 9 a.m. at the main sheriff's office in downtown Phoenix. Bring any additional documentation you have, though honestly, what you've already sent is probably sufficient for the warrant." "Warrant?" I asked, even though I'd expected it. "We're going to arrest Patricia Morrison and Derek Huang. Based on the evidence, we're looking at multiple counts of criminal impersonation, fraud, theft, and extortion. Mr. Huang has already contacted us through a lawyer, actually. He's willing to cooperate fully in exchange for a plea deal. Apparently, Patricia recruited him by lying about what they were doing, and he didn't realize the full extent of the scheme until today." "Good," I said. "He seemed uncomfortable when they were at my house." "His lawyer claims he was told they were simply delivering HOA notices and that the uniforms were just to make them look official, not to actually impersonate anyone. Whether that's true or not, we'll determine. But his cooperation is useful because he has access to records showing how long this has been going on and how much money Patricia collected." After I hung up with Detective Price, I got another call, this one from a number that showed up as Patricia Morrison on my caller ID. I let it go to voicemail. She called 4 more times over the next hour, never leaving a message. Then the text messages started. "You have no right to slander me on social media. I'm contacting my lawyer. Everything I did was within HOA authority. You're going to regret this. I demand you take down that Facebook post immediately. The HOA board is meeting tomorrow night to discuss your removal from the neighborhood." I screenshot every single message and forwarded them to Detective Price. She responded within minutes. "Do not respond to her. Do not engage. Save everything. This helps establish consciousness of guilt." The next morning, I drove to the main sheriff's office in downtown Phoenix. The building was modern glass and concrete, and I had to go through security screening to get inside. Detective Price met me in the lobby. She was in her late 40s, with short gray hair and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she didn't miss much. "Mr. Larson, thanks for coming in. Follow me." She led me to a small interview room with a table, a few chairs, and a camera mounted in the corner. "We're going to record this statement, if that's all right with you." "Absolutely." For the next 90 minutes, I walked her through everything in detail, starting from the moment I saw the fake county van pull up, through my investigation of the neighborhood, to the threatening text messages from the night before. Detective Price asked clarifying questions, made notes, and occasionally had me repeat specific details. "Okay," she said when we were done. "Here's where things stand. We've identified 23 victims so far, with more potentially coming forward. The total amount of money Patricia Morrison collected under false pretenses is at least $8,000, possibly more. Derek Huang's lawyer provided us with a ledger that Patricia kept, and it shows she's been running this scheme for almost 6 months. 6 months! I felt sick. How did nobody report this sooner? Because she was careful about who she targeted. She went after people who were unlikely to question authority. Elderly residents, new homeowners who didn't know the area well. People who'd had legitimate code enforcement issues in the past and were scared of repeating them. She also spread it out enough that people didn't talk to each other about it. You breaking the story on Facebook was what connected all the dots. What about the HOA itself? Are they liable? That's complicated. We've subpoenaed HOA records, and it appears Patricia was acting entirely on her own. The other board members claim they had no knowledge of what she was doing. Whether that's true remains to be seen, but right now, we're focusing criminal charges on Patricia, and to a lesser extent Derek. The civil liability is a separate matter that your neighbors will have to pursue. When are you arresting her? Detective Price glanced at her watch. Actually, officers are executing the warrant right now. At that exact moment, Patricia Morrison was at home when the doorbell rang. She'd spent the night consulting with her lawyer, convinced that she could spin this situation as a misunderstanding. When she opened the door and saw 4 sheriff's deputies standing there with a warrant, reality finally hit her. Patricia Morrison, you're under arrest for criminal impersonation of a public official, theft by fraud and extortion, the lead deputy said, turning her around to handcuff her. You have the right to remain silent. Patricia's lawyer had told her not to say anything if she was arrested, but she couldn't help herself. This is ridiculous. I was just enforcing HOA rules. Those people are just mad because they got caught violating regulations. Madam, you need to stop talking, the deputy said as he walked her to the patrol car. I learned all of this later from Detective Price, who called me that afternoon to let me know the arrest had gone smoothly. She's being processed now. Bail hearing will probably be tomorrow. Given the non-violent nature of the crimes and her lack of prior record, she'll likely make bail, but the charges are serious enough that she's looking at significant penalties if convicted. Over the next few days, the story exploded beyond our little neighborhood. A local news station picked it up after one of my neighbors contacted them. Suddenly, reporters were knocking on doors throughout Heritage Hills, and Patricia's arrest photo was on the evening news. The headline read, HOA president arrested for impersonating county officials in elaborate fraud scheme. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Patricia from her position as president. They also voted to dissolve several of the more draconian rules she'd implemented during her tenure, including the ones about specific paint colors and landscaping designs. The board president, a reasonable guy named Frank Delgado, made a statement apologizing to all the affected homeowners and promising that the HOA would cooperate fully with the investigation. We had no idea what Patricia was doing, Frank said at a neighborhood meeting a week after her arrest. About 70 people showed up, filling the community center beyond capacity. She told us she was doing neighborhood inspections and sending out violation notices, which is within her authority as president. We never knew she was dressing up as a county official or collecting money. When we review our financial records, none of that money ever made it into HOA accounts. She was keeping it all for herself. So what happens to those of us who paid her? Someone called out from the back of the room. That's going to be handled through the criminal restitution process and potentially civil court, Frank said. The Attorney General's office has assured us they're making restitution a priority in their prosecution. You may also want to consult with a lawyer about suing her personally to recover your losses plus additional damages. I raised my hand. What's being done to prevent something like this from happening again? Frank nodded. Great question. We're implementing several new policies. First, all HOA inspections will now be done by licensed property management professionals, not board members. Second, We're requiring quarterly financial audits by an independent accountant. Third, we're revising our bylaws to include stricter oversight of board member actions and a clear process for homeowners to appeal any violations. And fourth, we're creating a neighborhood watch system specifically to identify and report any suspicious activity by people claiming to represent official entities. The meeting went on for another hour, with people venting their frustrations and sharing their stories. The elderly couple who'd repainted their house stood up and described how Patricia had made them feel stupid and scared. Jessica talked about the Christmas wreath incident and how she'd cried after paying the fine because money was tight. Tim Reynolds pointed out that the stress of dealing with the fake violation had caused arguments between him and his wife. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that Patricia's actions had caused far more damage than just financial losses. She'd eroded trust within the community, made people afraid in their own homes, and created an atmosphere of fear and suspicion. 3 weeks after Patricia's arrest, the preliminary hearing took place. I attended along with about a dozen other victims. The courtroom was packed. Patricia sat at the defense table with her lawyer, looking smaller somehow than she had in my driveway. She'd hired Marcus Webb, one of Phoenix's more expensive criminal defense attorneys, which made me wonder where she'd gotten the money. Then I remembered she'd stolen at least $8,000 from my neighbors. Maybe she was using that to pay for her defense. The prosecutor, an assistant attorney general named Robert Klein, laid out the case methodically. He presented the video I'd recorded, testimony from Derek Huang describing how Patricia had recruited him and what they'd done. Bank records showing deposits Patricia had made that coincided with the fake fines she'd collected, and statements from 23 different victims. Patricia's lawyer tried to argue that she'd simply been overzealous in her HOA duties, and that any confusion about her authority was unintentional. My client takes her role as HOA president very seriously, Marcus Webb said. Perhaps too seriously, but there was no criminal intent here. She genuinely believed she was helping to maintain property values in the neighborhood. Judge Helen Martinez wasn't buying it. Counselor, your client purchased fake county badges online, had uniforms made to resemble county officials, and drove a van that was deliberately designed to look like a government vehicle. That's not overzealousness. That's premeditation. The preliminary hearing lasted about 3 hours. At the end, Judge Martinez ruled that there was sufficient evidence to bind Patricia over for trial on all charges. She also increased Patricia's bail from $10,000 to $50,000 based on the evidence presented, and what the judge called a clear pattern of deceptive behavior that suggests a risk of further criminal activity. Patricia's face went white when the judge announced the new bail amount. She'd already paid the original bail, but now she'd have to come up with additional money or go back to jail. Her lawyer immediately requested a sidebar to discuss payment arrangements. Outside the courthouse, several of my neighbors gathered to talk about what came next. Detective Price joined us, along with a victim advocate from the Attorney General's office named Maria Santos. What we'd like to do, Maria explained, is organize all of you as a unified victim group for the sentencing phase. Arizona law allows victims to make impact statements, and having all of you speak would help the judge understand the full scope of harm Patricia Morrison caused. Will we get our money back? Mrs. Henderson asked. Her husband stood beside her, looking tired. They were both in their 70s, and this whole ordeal had clearly taken a toll. That's our goal, Maria said. Restitution will be part of any plea deal or sentence. The prosecutor is committed to making sure every dollar she stole is returned to victims. However, I want to be realistic with you. If Patricia doesn't have the assets to pay full restitution immediately, it might be set up as a payment plan that could take months or years. What about interest? Someone asked. Or compensation for our time and stress? Criminal restitution typically covers direct financial losses, Maria explained. For additional damages like emotional distress, lost wages from having to deal with this situation, or punitive damages, you'd need to file a civil lawsuit. I can provide you with referrals to attorneys who handle these kinds of cases if you're interested. Over the next few weeks, several developments unfolded. First, Derek Huang pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of criminal facilitation in exchange for his cooperation. He received probation, community service, and was ordered to pay restitution for his role, though his portion was much smaller since he hadn't been the mastermind. His testimony would be crucial at Patricia's trial. Second, the local news coverage prompted people from other neighborhoods to come forward. It turned out Patricia had lived in 2 other HOA communities before Heritage Hills, and in both cases, she'd been on the board and had been accused of overstepping her authority. While she apparently hadn't run the same impersonation scheme before, there were complaints about harassment and abuse of power. This pattern would be useful in establishing her mindset and history of behavior. Third, and most unexpectedly, Patricia's husband filed for divorce. According to the court filings, which became public record, he claimed he'd had no knowledge of what she was doing, and that her arrest and the subsequent revelation of her criminal activity had caused irreparable harm to their marriage. The divorce filing also revealed that Patricia had hidden the money she'd stolen in a separate bank account her husband didn't know about. That hidden account was a gift to the prosecution. It proved that Patricia knew what she was doing was wrong, that she'd deliberately concealed it, and that she'd been planning to keep the money for herself rather than putting it toward any legitimate HOA purpose. The trial was scheduled for late October, about 3 months after Patricia's arrest. In the weeks leading up to it, I stayed in close contact with Detective Price and the victim advocate. We organized the neighborhood victims, made sure everyone who wanted to testify was prepared, and gathered additional evidence that might be useful. One evening in early October, I was in my backyard grilling dinner when my phone rang. It was Robert Klein, the prosecutor. "Mr. Larson, I wanted to give you a heads up before it becomes public. Patricia Morrison's attorney has approached us about a plea deal." "What kind of deal?" I asked, setting down my tongs. "She's willing to plead guilty to all charges in exchange for a sentencing recommendation of 2 years in prison followed by 5 years of probation, with restitution paid in full within the first year." "Can she actually pay full restitution in a year?" "According to her lawyer, yes. Apparently, she has access to funds through a family inheritance that she's been keeping separate. Her husband's divorce filing actually forced her to disclose all her assets, and there's enough there to cover the $8,000 she stole plus court costs and fees." "What do you think about the deal?" I asked. "Honestly, I'm inclined to recommend the victims accept it. If we go to trial, we'll probably win, but there's always risk. She could get lucky with a sympathetic jury, and even if we convict, sentencing is at the judge's discretion. She might get more time, but she also might get less. This deal guarantees prison time, guarantees restitution, and saves your neighbors from having to testify and relive the trauma." "Have you talked to the other victims?" Maria is reaching out to everyone now. "We're going to hold a meeting this weekend for all the victims to discuss the offer. Your input carries a lot of weight since you were the one who initially reported this and documented everything. If you think people should accept, they'll likely follow your lead." I thought about it for a long moment, watching the smoke rise from the grill. Set up the meeting. Let's hear what everyone has to say. That Saturday, about 30 people gathered at the Heritage Hills Community Center. Robert Klein and Maria Santos presented the plea deal in detail, explaining exactly what it meant and answering questions. The discussion got heated at times. Some people wanted Patricia to go away for longer to really pay for what she'd done. Others were just exhausted and wanted it to be over. Mrs. Henderson raised her hand. Will we really get all our money back? Yes, Robert said firmly. That's guaranteed as part of the deal. She'll have to pay every penny, and if she doesn't, she goes to prison for additional time. And she'll actually go to prison, not just probation. 2 years minimum. She'll serve at least 85% of that under Arizona law, so about 20 months in actual prison. Tim Reynolds spoke up. What about the other neighborhoods she lived in? The ones where she was accused of harassment before? Those complaints were filed with HOA boards but never resulted in criminal charges, Robert explained. However, we'll be including that history in our sentencing recommendation to show this is a pattern of behavior, not an isolated incident. The discussion continued for another hour. Finally, we took a vote. 26 people voted to accept the plea deal. 4 wanted to go to trial. The majority ruled. Patricia Morrison pleaded guilty on October 28th in the same courtroom where her preliminary hearing had been held. She stood before Judge Martinez and admitted to criminal impersonation of a public official, theft by fraud, and extortion. Her voice was barely audible as she said "guilty" 3 times. Miss Morrison, Judge Martinez said, before I accept this plea, I want to make sure you understand what you're admitting to. You deliberately and systematically deceived your neighbors, people who trusted you as their HOA president. You made them afraid in their own homes. You stole their money. You violated the authority they'd given you in the most egregious way possible. Do you understand that? Yes, Your Honor, Patricia whispered. And you understand that you're going to prison. That this will be on your record for the rest of your life. That you'll be a convicted felon. Yes, Your Honor. The judge accepted the plea and scheduled sentencing for 3 weeks later. In the interim, Patricia was allowed to remain free on bail, though she was confined to house arrest with an ankle monitor. The sentencing hearing in mid-November was the final chapter of the whole ordeal. The courtroom was packed again, with every victim who could attend present. The judge allowed anyone who wanted to make a victim impact statement to do so. Mrs. Henderson went first. She walked slowly to the microphone, her hands shaking slightly as she held her prepared statement. My husband and I are retired and living on a fixed income, she read. When Miss Morrison told us we had to repaint our house or face daily fines, we were terrified. We had to dip into our emergency savings to pay for it. That money was supposed to be for medical expenses or home repairs. Instead, it went to fix a problem that didn't exist because Miss Morrison lied to us. We trusted her because she had a badge and seemed official. She took advantage of that trust, and I don't think I'll ever fully forgive her for it. Tim Reynolds spoke about the stress the fake violation caused in his marriage, and how he'd almost missed his daughter's birthday party because he'd been frantically trying to move the trampoline to avoid the supposed fines. Jessica described crying in her kitchen after paying the fine for her Christmas wreath, wondering how she was going to explain the missing $75 to her husband when they were already behind on bills. One by one, people stood up and described how Patricia's actions had affected them. Some were angry, some were sad, and some were just exhausted. After the 12th statement, Judge Martinez held up a hand. I think I've heard enough to understand the scope of impact here, she said gently. Does anyone else absolutely need to speak? I stood up. Your Honor, I'd like to say something. She nodded. Mr. Larson, please proceed. I walked to the microphone. I hadn't prepared a statement, but I knew what I wanted to say. Your Honor, I was lucky. I caught Patricia before she could scam me. But this whole experience has shown me how easy it is for someone in a position of minor authority to abuse that power. Patricia Morrison didn't need fancy technology or elaborate schemes. All she needed was a fake badge, a clipboard, and the willingness to lie to people who trusted her. What bothers me most is that she targeted the vulnerable. She went after the elderly, the new, the scared. She exploited their respect for authority and their fear of consequences. That's not just criminal, it's cruel. I hope that whatever sentence you impose sends a message that this kind of behavior will not be tolerated in our community or anywhere else. I sat back down, and Patricia's lawyer stood to make his final argument. He talked about her previously clean record, her mental health struggles, and her willingness to accept responsibility by pleading guilty. It all felt hollow after listening to the victims. Finally, Judge Martinez spoke. Miss Morrison, I've presided over a lot of fraud cases in my career. I've seen people steal millions of dollars through complex financial schemes. What you did was smaller in dollar amounts, but in some ways more insidious. You didn't target strangers or faceless corporations. You targeted your neighbors, people who elected you to represent their interests. You betrayed that trust in the most fundamental way. I've read your mental health evaluations. I've considered your lack of prior record. I've noted your guilty plea. But I've also listened to these victims today, and the harm you caused is undeniable. Therefore, I'm accepting the plea agreement, but with a modification. Instead of 2 years, you will serve 3 years in the Arizona Department of Corrections, followed by 5 years of probation. Restitution of $8,200 will be paid within 6 months, not 1 year. If you fail to pay it in that time frame, your probation will be revoked. You will also be required to perform 200 hours of community service after your release. And finally, you are permanently barred from serving on any HOA board or in any position of authority within a homeowners association. Do you understand this sentence? Patricia, who had been crying quietly throughout the victim's statements, nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Do you have anything you'd like to say before I make this sentence official? Patricia stood up shakily. I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I know that's not enough. I know I hurt people who trusted me. I don't have a good explanation for why I did it. I just thought I was helping the neighborhood look better, and then it got out of control, and I didn't know how to stop. I'm sorry. Judge Martinez's expression didn't soften. Miss Morrison, the time to stop was before you started. You're remanded into custody immediately to begin serving your sentence. 2 bailiffs approached Patricia. She looked back at her lawyer with panic in her eyes, but there was nothing he could do. They handcuffed her and led her out of the courtroom through a side door. Several victims watched her go with grim satisfaction. Others looked sad. Mrs. Henderson was crying, though I wasn't sure if it was from relief or something else. Outside the courthouse, the neighborhood victims gathered one more time. Detective Price and Maria Santos joined us, along with Robert Klein. I want to thank all of you for your patience with this process, Robert said. I know it's been difficult and time-consuming, but the outcome here is significant. We got a conviction, prison time, and full restitution. That doesn't always happen in fraud cases. When will we actually get our money? Someone asked. Patricia has 6 months to pay, Maria explained. However, her lawyer has indicated she'll pay within the next 30 days to avoid any complications with the sentence. You should all receive checks directly from her attorney's trust account. If you don't receive payment within 45 days, Contact our office immediately." True to the lawyer's word, checks started arriving about 3 weeks later. I watched as neighbors posted in the Facebook group about receiving their restitution. Mrs. Henderson posted a photo of her check with the memo line reading, "Criminal restitution per court order." Tim Reynolds wrote, "Finally got our $200 back. Never thought I'd be happy to see a check from someone going to prison, but here we are." As December arrived and the whole ordeal finally wrapped up, the Heritage Hills neighborhood slowly returned to normal. The new HOA board was considerably more laid back than Patricia's regime had been. Frank Delgado remained as president, and he ran things with a light touch, focusing on actual community needs like maintaining common areas and organizing social events, rather than nitpicking everyone's property. The neighborhood organized a holiday party in mid-December, partly to celebrate the season and partly to reconnect after everything that had happened. Someone had made cookies decorated to look like fake county badges, which was dark humor, but everyone laughed. We talked about other things besides the HOA scandal, remembered that we were neighbors who'd mostly gotten along fine before all this started. Tim Reynolds pulled me aside at one point during the party. "Hey, I never properly thanked you for figuring all this out and reporting it. If you hadn't recorded that video and gone to the authorities, she'd probably still be running her scam." "I just did what anyone should do when they see something illegal," I said. "Yeah, but a lot of people wouldn't have. They'd have just paid the fake fine or moved the trampoline or repainted their house and never questioned it. You questioned it, and that made all the difference." Other neighbors expressed similar sentiments throughout the evening. Mrs. Henderson gave me a hug and told me I'd restored her faith in people doing the right thing. Jessica brought me homemade cookies as a thank you. Even people who I barely knew stopped by to shake my hand and express appreciation. It was gratifying, but also a little uncomfortable. I didn't feel like I'd done anything heroic. I just recognized a scam and reported it. The real heroes were the people who'd come forward to testify, who'd been willing to share their stories publicly despite embarrassment or fear. They were the ones who'd ensured Patricia faced real consequences. As the party wound down and I walked home through the cool December evening, I thought about everything that had happened over the past few months. My quiet neighborhood in Gilbert, Arizona, had been upended by one person's decision to abuse a small amount of authority for personal gain. But it had also been restored by a community coming together to demand accountability. I checked the Heritage Hills Facebook group one more time before bed that night. Someone had posted a photo from the party with the caption, "Here's to better days and an HOA that actually serves the neighborhood." The post had dozens of likes and comments full of relief and optimism. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Price. "Wanted to let you know Patricia Morrison was officially processed into state prison today. She'll serve her full sentence at the Perryville Women's Facility. Thanks again for your cooperation throughout this investigation. Cases like this don't usually wrap up this cleanly." I texted back my thanks and set the phone down. It was finally, truly over. Patricia Morrison would spend the next 3 years in prison. The neighborhood had recovered its money. The HOA had reformed its policies. And most importantly, everyone now knew that impersonating government officials wasn't just wrong. It was a serious crime with serious consequences. I slept well that night for the first time in months, knowing that justice had been served and my neighborhood was safe again. The fake county van would never pull up to another driveway. The fraudulent badges would never fool another trusting homeowner. And Patricia Morrison's reign of manufactured authority had ended exactly where it belonged, with her facing real authority in the form of the justice system. In the months that followed, Life in Heritage Hills settled into a comfortable rhythm. The HOA newsletter, now written by Frank's wife Maria Delgado, focused on community events rather than violation notices. The neighborhood watch system we'd set up after Patricia's arrest had yet to identify any suspicious activity, but people felt better knowing it existed. I occasionally thought about Patricia sitting in Perryville, wearing an actual uniform this time instead of a fake one. I wondered if she understood the full impact of what she'd done, or if she still saw herself as someone who'd just been trying to help the neighborhood. I hoped she was getting the mental health treatment the court had recommended as part of her sentence. But mostly, I thought about my neighbors, the elderly couple who could now relax without fear of fake fines. The young families who no longer worried about county officials showing up with clipboards. The single woman who could put up her holiday decorations without anxiety. They were all free from Patricia's manufactured authority, and that freedom was worth everything we'd gone through to achieve it. One afternoon in late January, almost exactly 6 months after that initial confrontation in my driveway, I was checking my mail when Frank Delgado walked over from across the street. "Hey Connor, got a minute?" he asked. "Sure, what's up?" "The HOA board is holding elections next month, and we'd like you to consider running for a position. Given everything that happened, we think having someone with your attention to detail and understanding of proper procedures would be valuable." I thought about it for a moment, then shook my head. "I appreciate the offer, Frank, but I think I'll pass. I've had enough of HOA drama to last a lifetime, but I'll definitely vote and stay involved in a general sense." He laughed. "Can't say I blame you. The offer stands if you change your mind, though." As he walked away, I looked around at the neighborhood. Kids were playing basketball in someone's driveway. An elderly man was walking his dog. A young couple was unloading groceries from their car. Just normal, everyday life in a suburban Arizona community. That's all anyone really wanted from an HOA anyway. Not someone to police their mailbox designs or measure their fence heights or threaten them with fake county violations. Just someone to maintain the common areas, organize the occasional block party, and otherwise let people live their lives in peace. Patricia Morrison had forgotten that simple truth, and it had cost her everything. Her freedom, her reputation, her marriage, and her place in the community she'd claimed to be protecting. All because she'd decided that a little authority meant she could create her own rules, wear a fake badge, and terrify people into compliance. I went inside, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat on my back patio enjoying the winter sunshine. My phone buzzed with a notification from the Heritage Hills Facebook group. Someone had posted about organizing a neighborhood yard sale in February, asking who wanted to participate. The comments were cheerful and enthusiastic, people excited about a simple community event with no hidden agendas or fake violations. That was the real victory, I realized. Not Patricia going to prison, or the money being returned, or even the policy changes at the HOA. The real victory was reclaiming the simple pleasure of living in a neighborhood where people trusted each other and weren't afraid of their own homeowners association. I raised my coffee mug in a silent toast to that victory, to the neighbors who'd stood together, and to the truth that had ultimately prevailed over Patricia Morrison's elaborate web of lies. The fake badges were gone. The fake uniforms were evidence in a closed case. The white van with its fraudulent county insignia had been seized and probably sold at auction. And I was just a guy in Gilbert, Arizona, drinking coffee in his backyard, grateful that he'd trusted his instincts that Tuesday morning when something had seemed off about those supposed county officials. That moment of questioning, of refusing to accept authority at face value, had made all the difference. The sun was warm on my face, the coffee was good, and my neighborhood was finally, peacefully, blessedly normal again. Patricia Morrison was learning firsthand that real authority doesn't come from fake badges and manufactured violations. It comes from legitimacy, transparency, and the consent of the people being governed. She'd forgotten that. The neighborhood hadn't. And that made all the difference in how this story ended, with justice served, restitution paid, and a community stronger for having stood together against someone who tried to exploit their trust. I finished my coffee, went back inside, and got on with my day. Just another ordinary afternoon in Heritage Hills, exactly the way it should be.